Welcome to Plain Talk, where I'm gonna tell you, we're gonna talk politics, and you're gonna be like, well, that's what you do every podcast, Port. But I'm gonna tell you, we're gonna talk about the way in which we talk politics, and specifically the way we talk politics in a very particular setting, which is the classroom. Now, there's that old saying about how you don't talk about politics or religion in polite company, but I've always had a problem with that saying. And the reason why is that we live in a democratic society. We practice self-governance. And I don't know how you can live in a society like that without talking about politics, without talking about, hey, should property taxes be higher or lower? Who should be our state senator? Who should be our president? We are sort of obliged, if we're going to participate in the governance of ourselves, that we have to be talking about these. But we have a real problem these days. You may have noticed with talking about some of this. It's really hard. And there was an editorial, an op-ed in the Grand Forks Herald recently by two authors, and the headline was "Teaching Civil Discourse, a Classroom Blueprint for All America." And I thought that this just touched on so many hot button issues. First of all, our ability to talk one another civilly, also what's going on in our schools where there's a lot of pushback over what some people characterize as political content or political teaching, whether it's critical race theory or books in the library. There's a lot of contention about this. So I wanted to invite the two authors on. It's Klutsey Galvao, who is a social studies curriculum specialist at GBH Education, also a multi-platform creator for public media and a curriculum writer for the Civics Collection at PBS Learning Media. Also joining us is Benjamin Klutsey, who is the executive director of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, who is also shown in the documentary Undivide Us. First of all, welcome. And of course, Chad Oban, guest co-hosting, as he usually does. Lindsay, Ben, did I set this up right? I mean, am I even talking about this topic correctly? Lindsay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that when I started my teaching career in 2006, you could have great conversation and civil discourse in the classroom. And yeah, there were definitely points of division at the time in the political sphere, but I really jumped in talking about elections with my students. And when I left the classroom in 2021, that wasn't the case anymore. And young people are also really craving the ability to have these conversations, to engage thoughtfully with one another. So I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think that's why our work is so important in what we're doing today.
How do we get to a point? Because one thing, it's one thing to say, well, we should talk about these things civilly, and sure, I mean, everybody agrees with that nominally, but how do we get to a point where in a classroom, and I think one of the real drawbacks here is that, you two referenced this in your op-ed, is that teachers have to be feeling a lot of trepidation about tackling some of this, about how am I even going to talk about the electoral process when there is a not small faction of Americans who feel that the elections are rigged? Why would I even want to, I mean, even teaching something as basic as this is how presidents are elected, it's like that's not even safe territory anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we're in difficult times. I think that when we talk about, division and politics, we have to distinguish between two things. And political scientists call something, political polarization and affective polarization. Political polarization is what we've always had in this country. We've always been divided on issues, everything from the flavors of ice cream to, what we should do on foreign policy, national security, yada, yada, yada. And, for a very long time now, I think over the past few decades, I think Americans may not have changed much on where they are on issues. If anything at all, they may have gotten a little bit closer on some key issues, maybe on the climate or on the Second Amendment and so on. But what has changed, and just to finish the point on political polarization, it really is the ideological distance between two parties. And, that's oftentimes what we're talking about when we talk about, political polarization, pro-choice, pro-life, that kind of distinction. It's a stark contrast, and you can tell where someone is, based on that sort of contention that I'm pro-life or I'm pro-choice. Affective polarization is how we feel about each other, which is what we've seen decline over the past few decades. And it's no longer that, hey, I disagree with you, and that's okay, we can move on. But no, I disagree with you, but I see you as a threat to my existence. And I think that's the danger here. And we're getting, it's gotten worse because I think we spend less time with people across divides and differences. And we're letting, politicians, social media, the media define who the other person is or who the other side is. It's sort of a caricature of folks on the other side. So when you see that someone is labeled blue, labeled red, immediately you have a set of impressions about who that person is. And so I think that just thinking more broadly, that is where we are. We've sorted ourselves into geographical spaces with people who are like-minded. Same with virtual spaces, people who are like-minded. We're not getting this encounter. So what's happening is that in classrooms, we should be treating this not necessarily as a polarization issue, although I recognize that is an issue, but we should treat it as a skills issue. And that if we don't learn how to engage with one another across differences, we'll get to a place where it becomes much, much, much harder for us to address important questions that are affecting our society, our community, our local area.
So,
Absolutely. Oh,
no, can I ask a follow-up question there?
sure.
Yeah, well, not a follow. I'm gonna take us into the actual school setting, and Rob and I talk a lot about this. He's right of center, I'm left of center. We both have school-age kids. We both believe very strongly that our kids need to be, they need to be exposed to both sides of the political spectrum, right? And they can choose where they want to be on this thing. The only thing at my house is my kid will be a Dodgers fan. That's the only thing that is sort of pre-described at our house. But I think about what schools look like. I mean, I have a brother who's a school administrator. I have a kid who's in second grade. And often what happens in our schools is something gets taught as simple as LGBTQ folks exist, that they're human beings. And you've got a couple parents who come in and lose their mind on the administrator. The administrator then tells the teacher, you can't talk about this. You can't talk about this. So can you talk a little bit about the role of parents, the role of administrators, the role of teachers to create that space where we can have these conversations? Because I think it does take all three entities in order to teach these skills that Ben was just talking about.
Yeah, I think we always have to come from this approach. So the goal is we're never going to teach students what they should be thinking. Our goal here is to teach them how to think. And I think that when you start having these conversations with all these different parties who come and meet at a school system, that kind of needs to be the mutual agreed upon space. A teacher is not ever going to tell a child, this is what you need to think. And that's where we really want to bring in the skill set of engaging in civil discourse. So when Ben and I have talked about civil discourse, when we've run webinars on it, when we first met, we really talked about ways to easily engage in civil discourse in conversations that feel safe. So, for example, we'll kind of practice this with are you a dog person or a cat person, for example? And Ben and I can walk you through this a little bit more later. But the whole point of these exercises is to start the practice of how to see each other from different perspectives, how to role play, how to model conversation, how to see each other's humanity and empathy, and really kind of bridge that way. So when you start bringing in more contentious issues or what may appear to be a contentious issue, even if it's not in the classroom, you've kind of created a culture where this conversation is positive, it's supported, it's appreciated, and it's seen for what it needs to be, existence in a civil society. And I do think, again, there is a craving for it. There is definitely a lot of trepidation, especially in purple states, for teachers to engage, because I think that's where they're most afraid. But when Ben and I have worked with teachers before, I think even just providing them with some of the language of what is the purpose of civil discourse really helps their framework to then be able to bring this into the classroom and then articulate this to their students, to the parents, to the administration. So again, all we're trying to do is start to give some of the tools to flex these skills. Because, I mean, think of it like going to the gym. You're not going to, deadlift 250 pounds the first day walking into the gym. You've got to train up to that. And that's what we want to bring to teachers and the school community at large with our conversations on civil discourse. And then again, reminding them, whether it's through Ben's work at Mercatus Center or my work at GBH Education and the Civics Collection, that there's so many different ways to practice the skill.
But I think you're right that, parents, administrators, we all have to take a step back and recognize to what extent we've all been, polarized. I have kids as well. And, my kids asked me recently, Dad, are we Democrats or Republicans? Who are the bad guys and who are the good guys? And it was an opportunity to sort of step back and say, no, that they're all good people, right? Of course, you find Democrats who are bad and Republicans who are bad, but they all have different perspectives on how to, solve all kinds of problems, policy issues and questions in our society. So everyone is really trying to do their best. And when you get older, you get to figure out, where you stand on a lot of these issues. But we try to avoid a lot of this political noise in our home. I don't have cable TV on purpose because there's a lot of this sort of like the WWE approach to politics on there, which I don't think is healthy. Now, I'm not saying that every parent should do that in your homes. I'm just saying that we should really think carefully how we are talking to our kids about politics, about the issues that people are divided on, and not to, sort of place people in categories as, good versus evil.
Yeah, and I think that also comes to the point that a healthy democracy requires disagreement, right? We need to have discussion. We need to have conversation. We're not going to see eye to eye on every issue, and that makes us more creative. That makes us more flexible problem solvers, and that really helps us figure out how to compromise and live together. Just to add on to that, the other piece that I really like to tell teachers and parents and families is to really focus at the local level. So I think it's really easy to kind of conflate these large national debates that are happening for kind of cheap talking points or to be posted on your social media or, what did X politician say today about Y issue, is to really focus on your local community, because that's a place where you can affect the most amount of change. It's a place where you can have conversations, and these are your next door neighbors. So you have to look them in the eye, right? And even if you don't agree on every single issue, hopefully you're looking to come to some kind of consensus or agreement, or your kids play together or go to school together. So there's a really strong vested interest in our collective humanity at that point. So I really like to, again, focus on what is happening locally and how you can affect change then. I think we really kind of easily conflate the campaign season with the rest of politics. So I would say that,
the campaigns.
Well, that is true, right? It goes on for years and years and years. I don't even think there was a break anymore. But I always told my students, once that person is elected, they work for you, regardless of political party. And so you have every right to go speak to that person and ask for what you need or share your beliefs. And it's their job to represent you. And that's really cool. And that's incredibly empowering. So I think we just kind of need to reset the filter on how we have some of these conversations, again, as we start to bring in the rhetoric around civil discourse as well.
I think one mistake we make a lot is that we treat elections like they end things, and they don't end things, right? The debate's never really over. There's always another election coming. There's no ultimate victories, and yet we're treating this as the election to end all elections. Well, I hope not. Because I'd sure like to continue having elections so we continue having the debate and evolving. Now, one thing, everything you're saying I like, and I think it makes sense, but it almost seems kind of quaint to treat the political divide as if we were just divided over what are we going to do about Social Security, or should we have a national abortion ban, or shouldn't we have a national abortion ban? Sometimes it feels like we're debating about reality itself. I mean, if you're having a gun control debate in the classroom and you're having a debate about, there's guns in our society and the Second Amendment is a thing that exists, but we also want safe communities. How do we handle all this? And somebody comes along and says, well, the Sandy Hook school shooting didn't happen. How do you deal with that? Because you can't you can't really both sides that. That's the Sandy Hook school shooting happened. That's factual. And yet we were living increasingly in a world where, thanks to the unscrupulous media commentators and politicians, thanks to declining trust in our institutions like the news media and the academy and scientific institutions, thanks to social media and artificial intelligence. I mean, it's getting to a point where it would be nice if we were just divided by pro-life versus pro-choice, but we're not anymore. Sometimes we're divided by, I'm living in the real world and you're living in a bubble where you think that somebody staged a school shooting. So how do you handle that?
I think you're absolutely right. Facts are facts, and you have to engage on facts as an educator. But we also have to sort of peel back a little bit and try to understand where these facts are coming from. There's a reason why, conspiracy theories become appealing to certain people. Sometimes you are in a moment in your life where you feel like, there are people who are against you. You're going through a very difficult time, psychologically, emotionally, and so on. And it's very easy to latch onto something that, may not be based in fact, but you feel as though it is something that gives you a certain kind of identity or connects you to a certain group of people who also believe the same thing. A good friend of mine, Hugo Georgian, who studies, he's a political scientist who studies conspiracy theories, talks about how all conspiracy theories emerge from this sort of idea of the cabal theory, that there's a small number of people who control everything and are trying to prevent you from getting X, Y, or Z. So imagine that you've lost your job, or you've experienced a major breakup in your life, or something severe like that. It can take you to a dark place and make you believe any flimsy thing. And so sometimes when someone says, Sandy Hooks didn't happen or what have you, it's not really about Sandy Hooks. It's about a number of other things. Now, in the classroom setting, you may not have time to sort of, engage and unpack what's going on there. But I think as human to human, person to person, you could always be a friend to someone and say, tell me more. Tell me why you got there. Why is that the case? And as they speak and they engage, they create an opportunity for you at some point in the conversation to say, what do you think? And then they might respect, what you have to share and maybe help them unpack some of these things. But again, it's not always about the particular, facts of the case. It might be about other things that are underneath. And I will say one thing. When we talk about divisions and polarization and all of these things, it's a very small number of people who are most entrenched, in these sort of echo chambers. I think across the left and the right, the total is about 18 to 20%. I think 9 on each side or so. And sometimes it seems as though everyone who is team red or team blue is part of this group. They tend to be the minority. They tend to be the loudest as well. So I think we have to put all of these things in perspective.
And I think in the classroom, as a teacher, I would always ask, how do you know what you know? So really getting children and students to reflect on, where did I get this information from? How do I know what it's fact? And then to Ben's point, what is my visceral emotional response to that information? I think it's really also important today, not even just to have, increased engagement in civil discourse, but also teachers really need to be steeped in media literacy skills. And so a lot of the work that we like to do with teachers and students is to have teachers and students check where that information came from, but also when they're engaging with a piece of media, what is their emotional response to that, and why do they feel the way they do engaging with that social media or that news clip they read, to start to kind of parse out what is misinformation, what is disinformation, what is sensationalism, because we don't want to operate our entire society just based on emotions. That is not a healthy society. We need to get back to a place of logic and reasoning as well. And so again, it's equipping teachers with the ability to have these conversations. And I think we want to make sure that we're not just saying that our students are young, so they're automatically digital natives. They need the support of adults to navigate that space as well. And so I always go, how do you know what you know?
Lindsay,
I was just going to interject that it's not a digital phenomenon. I mean, if we want to look at people who have been lured into some very, very false ways of thinking, I mean, look at the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is a horrendous anti-Semitic text that has been hugely influential well before the digital age, but has lured everybody. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. I mean, all sorts of.
Yeah, Lindsay, I always think about public schools primarily, but all schools are sort of the place where society's ills come to a head, right? If it's poverty, if it's other issues related, but schools have to deal with that. And often it ends up being teachers who have to deal with those things. So teachers are spread all these different directions. Do you think, I mean, you're a former educator and somebody who works with teachers, isn't it a bit unfair to teachers to think that they can create a system where we can have civil discourse in a world where nobody wants to have civil discourse? I mean, even you just said, teachers need to be media literate and all these different things. I mean, teachers have more students than ever before. They don't get paid well. They're spread all these different directions. But how can we expect a teacher to be the person who's solving this sort of worldwide issue, right? I mean, I just, and I know you're not saying that they can do this by themselves, but it just seems like a really, really big lift to get this done in an environment where that's where we need to get it done, right? And so how would you respond to a teacher listening to this saying, hey, just another thing that they're going to expect me to figure out for them?
Oh, how many hours do we have for this conversation?
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, dang. Okay. So yes, there is an immense demand on teachers. And I think to your point, it's continued to pile up. And we also live in a society that I think in many ways, teachers were the champions during COVID, and now we're even more polarized on where teachers stand before. So I recognize that it's a big lift. And a few things that I would say, first and foremost, this is where we do need to get teachers, administrators, and parents having conversations to say, we are looking for what's the best interest of our students to thrive in a civil society, right? We need to start bringing that buy-in and building that community. And I think, again, this is where local community really matters. I think schools are where we really stake a lot of our values, and where we put certain demands on teachers, show what our values are. But what I would say to teachers personally, the payoff in the end will be immense to you if you give your students a place to have these hard conversations. And I know it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of scaffolding. But that's also why at GB Education on PBS Learning Media, we have a free civics collection with free resources for teachers to use and implement in their classroom. That's why we offer webinars and professional development, because we want to take some of that lift off of teachers, be able to provide them with the support they need in order to do this work. But I think there's this micro level and then a macro level. So for a micro level to a teacher, I would say, I've been in your shoes, I feel you. But if you can teach 2 students to have a conversation, and hopefully they're going to see, if nothing else, their shared humanity, ideally they may even develop a friendship across certain divides that can be really powerful for the rest of their life. That is an incredible gift that you are providing for students as they go off in the future. But this is where I'd also say we really need to start reflecting in our local communities and in the national dialogue that we need to see schools as a place where civil society starts, and we need to really take that seriously.
One thing that really scares me a little bit is it seems like everything we're kind of discussing is downstream from the source of the problems. Although I'm not really that prepared to put my finger on an explicit source, although I think a lot of it happens in the home. If parents are afraid of their children being exposed to other ideas, I think it's really going to be hard, first of all, to ask teachers to do this, because teachers are sometimes putting their jobs at risk by going down some of these roads, even if it's just to try to promote something civil. So I don't know. I mean, this is larger than what you guys are talking about. You guys are talking about a classroom experience, and I guess what I'm saying is, but it's so much bigger than the classroom, and I realize that's outside of the scope. But I mean, that's what really scares me is I view it that we as a society need to get back to recognizing that it's okay. Like, if you're going to live in a free society, the price of admission is you're going to see and hear some things you don't like sometimes. I don't know how we get Americans, because I know some Americans embrace that, but a lot of them don't, and they're very loud and they're very active. And I don't know how to get them back to embracing what I consider a fundamentally core, I mean, American idea, although, I mean, really anywhere you're going to have a democracy or a liberal, small L liberal society. I don't know how you do it without that. And I feel like we've lost it, Ben.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that I think.
I'm sorry. I'm totally Eeyore. I have nothing to offer you but despair.
No. We need more optimism, man. We need optimism. I think it's a bottom-up thing, right? It's what happens between you and your neighbor. It's what happens in your home, what happens in your community. We have to take responsibility for this work. It's not, it's not easy, but I think it's doable. I think the more we try, the better we'll be for it. When we did this documentary, it was really interesting because coming into these conversations and focus groups, I mean, we go to Atlanta, we go to Pittsburgh, we go to Phoenix, just bringing average Americans together. And we ask them before each conversation, to what extent do you think Americans are so divided that they just cannot have any conversation on difficult topics? They were like 90%, 70, 60, 50, someone said 99. And it was, they were worried and concerned. But after 2 hours, we talk about everything from education, immigration, abortion, guns, what have you. We say, how have we been able to go through all of this stuff without, fistfights? And they look at themselves like, wait a second, what's going on here? And I think it's because we have to think about abiding by certain principles, right? I mean, there are 3 core principles that we come to these conversations with. The first is respect. The idea that we are one another's dignified equals. If we're a society of self-governing equals, then we have to recognize that. And so we have to treat each other with respect. You have as much right to be here as I do. And so if we're going to sit here and share this space, we're going to give each other the utmost respect. That's principle number 1. Number 2 is authenticity. We're not going to mask our views, pretend to be something that we're not. We're going to be as honest as possible and confident as possible to describe, and express our views and opinions, especially because we respect one another, going back to principle 1. And then finally, curiosity. If we're going to be in a learning environment where we're going to be inquiring about each other, learning about each other, then we have to explore this with curiosity. We shouldn't be afraid to ask each other questions, so long as we respect one another, so long as we're being authentic about it. And so once people buy into this principle, it's great from then on, And so I think that we just have to get into the mode of practicing this with each other, with our friends, with our neighbors, engaging some reflective listening, where we're not always trying to listen to respond quickly to what somebody else is saying, but listening to see if we actually get what they mean or understand where they're coming from. Because I think that's sort of half the battle.
And one of the things that we're also working to do along with that is to provide historical examples of when it was really messy politically. We've been through tough times before as a nation, and we have come out through. And I think it's important, I like to hold on hope, that we remember our creedal promises. The preamble says that we're working to form a more perfect union. It's not perfect. It's not going to always be perfect, but it's active work. And so I think it's really important that we always kind of center. We have this beautiful Constitution, this incredible Declaration of Independence, and has lasted through civil war, has lasted through incredibly difficult times. And each generation gets to renew this promise. And so I hope that teachers and communities and students can work together to figure out what is more perfect.
Well, I really appreciate you both coming on. It's such an interesting topic to talk about, but also such an important one. I mean, to Chad's point, it is, I think, hard to put some of this on the back of teachers, but also, if not the classroom, then where? It's got to be a place, maybe not the place, but certainly a place where we tackle some of this stuff. Anyway, I want to thank you both coming on, Lindsay Galvao, Ben Klutsey. Certainly, thank you for.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob and Chad.
Thank you so much.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Well, I feel like that was a really good conversation. And again, I even from when I started blogging, I remember when people were like, well, you're going to write about politics? And my dad, who is very apolitical and is very uncomfortable about expressing his political views, because my dad just kind of wants to get along with everybody. And his view, like, he has views and he's very conservative, but he just, it's like they're his views and he doesn't really see the value. And I think he's always been kind of confused about my impulse to do what I do. And I've always argued, well, this is important. We live in a democracy. We have to participate. If you're silent, you're not participating. I do think we have to speak out. And I think the problems we're having now is just an inability to recognize, listen, the liberals aren't going away and the conservatives aren't going away and the libertarians aren't going away and the Green Party's not going away. We got to figure out how to live with one another, and we need to accept each coming election is not the election to end all elections. It's just an election, and we might elect some people you don't like. You're just going to have to try harder next time.
Yeah, and I saw some of the, comments on Facebook when you posted that this was going to take place, and some folks said you should never know what the politics of your teacher are. Well, I agree. My best teacher, government teachers, I didn't know what their politics were. I had some ideas, but it created a space where people could talk about politics and debate things. The problem that I see right now is just a fear that if you bring up any subject, even if it's from a neutral perspective, you often get folks coming in, and it like we talked about, teachers, administrators, all these folks are very, very busy. And then you have a handful of parents coming in and saying, you can't talk about that, or don't talk about that. And it doesn't create a safe space. And I think parents have a big role in this. Don't be afraid of your kids learning things you disagree with.
And you just used the term safe space. I would argue safe spaces aren't really what we're about. Okay? I mean, if your idea of a safe space is something that's sanitized from any point of view, or any facts or inconvenient truths that might create some turbulence for your worldview,
right?
Go live somewhere else, because you live in the United States of America. And again, the price of admission is you're going to see and hear some things you don't like.
Well, and I think that one of the things that was said is people are sort of clustering themselves, right? Conservatives are moving to red states. Liberals are moving to blue states. I see that in my own life. I mean, I think about people I went to high school with. By and large, the people who stuck around North Dakota are the conservatives. People who moved away to Minneapolis and other places are the progressives. That doesn't create a good environment. And I will tell you, as a left of center person in North Dakota, if I couldn't talk to Republicans or people who disagree with me, I'd be pretty lonely. But I also am pretty confident that I believe what I believe, and I can talk to people and not necessarily have to try to influence them one way or another. But let's have a conversation based on facts. And I mean, what we try to do here, right? I mean, that's what I think we need is more of these kind of conversations.
Although the facts thing is I think just adds a degree of complexity, because this has always been hard.
Right.
Like recognizing like this takes constant work in our society, recognizing we're a democracy. You're going to have to accept that you lose it. Your ideas or your candidates lose at the ballot box sometimes. That's hard enough. But then we start operating in a way where there's no accepted truths anymore. Like even think, I mean, the other day, Tucker Carlson, who's got an audience of I don't know how many millions, still, despite losing his Fox News. I mean, now he's on YouTube, he's on X, he's doing all these things. And he had a guy on, a quote-unquote historian, who was talking about World War II, arguing that Winston Churchill was the big villain of World War II. I don't know how he supersedes. I mean, I'm not arguing that Winston Churchill doesn't have problems, but he's the villain and not Adolf Hitler, right? Not Benito Mussolini. I mean, and then
there's a lot of bad guys to choose from.
And then it was like, well, yeah, lots of people died in the German prison camps, but that's just because their military was so successful and they kept capturing all these people, and then they didn't have enough food to feed them, and so they were just thinking, well, if we kill them, they won't starve to death, and it's an act of mercy. And I'm thinking to myself, you're whitewashing the Holocaust.
Right.
And the thing is that is going on. I mean, to me, I would think, how many years, how many movies we've seen, how many books are out there, how well documented the Holocaust is. Like, we know what was going on in the inner circles of the Nazi Party. They were not altruistic people. They were disgusting, horrible people. But this guy's coming along in a very reasonable way, and he's not a stupid person.
Right. He knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing. And he's got command of certain facts that he uses out of context or misinterprets on purpose to support his stupid conclusions. But this guy is influencing people. And I think it's so difficult, because it's like, it's one thing to have a debate about, again, well, what are we going to do about Social Security? And you have ideas and I have ideas, and we both think we're right, and we're going to have to figure out a way to move forward together. But somebody over here says, well, the Holocaust didn't happen. Well, you can't really carve out space in the conversation for that. That is false.
So Rob Port's hot take this morning is the Holocaust was bad, and that should have universal appeal. And I agree with Rob's hot take. But you're absolutely right. I mean, most folks...
You're making fun of me, but we are at a point where we have to defend that. Like, that's not an obvious thing anymore to a lot of...
Yeah, I am. And it is crazy. And I saw that the historian on with Tucker Carlson...
Let's do air quotes around historian.
Yeah, there you go, historian. But again, they know exactly what they're doing, right? I mean, this isn't like dummies sitting out there and just making stuff up. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. We've created a situation where people are easily manipulative. I mean, they don't believe they don't believe what schools teach them, but they believe what they see on YouTube. And that you're right, that is hard when we don't have a shared set of facts. It does create this situation. And I mean, I think he said 9% on each side are sort of far right, far left, and everybody else is sort of somewhere in the middle. But even some of those folks in the middle ideologically don't necessarily share the same facts, right? And so it does create a situation where you can't have conversations about Social Security. You can't have conversations about different issues because there's just no shared set of facts. I mean, to the North Dakota legislature, I think some of the frustration we've seen the last 2 or 3 sessions isn't because Democrats and Republicans are fighting over what's the best policy, or even Bastiat versus traditional Republicans, what's the best policy. They're fighting over what's real and not real. Are we trying to solve real problems, or are we not trying to solve real problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's a side that has convinced themselves that our libraries are dens of iniquity where run by pedophiles who are trying to groom children and turn them trans. Like, there's people out there who believe that. And they have a not small role in the debates that are happening. And that is... I mean, our two guests who are wonderful, but like their approach, I feel like almost came off as and I want to use the word naive.
I think you used the word quaint at one point, and I think that's exactly right. It's sort of a quaint notion that in today's society that we can have these conversations without all hell breaking loose at a public school.
Yeah,
if that's happening.
The famous free speech quote from the Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, that the solution to I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the solution to bad speech is more speed, right?
Right.
And the problem with that statement is I agree with the sentiment being expressed. The problem is it doesn't scale to the internet age.
Right.
You know, it doesn't scale to where you've got so many people who just have so much time. I look at some of the people who comment on my Facebook, and the amount of time that they are putting commenting, I don't have time to respond to every one of their comments.
And especially when most of them are not based on sort of real conversations, or like my favorite is the amount of people who comment on articles they haven't read or podcasts they haven't listened to, and just go back and forth and back. And it's just like, just find something to do, Gabe. You know, just find something to do. It is very, very frustrating. But I also think this idea that, you know, you go into a school setting and a student says the earth is flat, and the teacher says, well, that's not true. And then they go home, their parents like, heck yeah, the earth is flat. And then they come in and they light up the administrators and they light up the teachers. What are you supposed to do?
And now we're doing a both sides thing on whether or not the earth's flat. And it's like, no, this is that we've been to space. We can see it. This is
allegedly. We've allegedly been to space, Rob. That was sarcasm, your listeners.
I mean, we have sent probes into interstellar space at this point. Like the evidence is well documented, and not just by the American government, but by scientists around the world.
But I think it goes back to what was said. It's this cabal idea, right? I mean, it's a small group of people who are trying to pull one over on us, and we're just on the outside, and that's the impetus for so many conspiracies.
I really like that. I suppose we'll call it a metaphor. And the reason I like it because I think it works. And I think what's happened is the internet age has made so much more communication. It's so much more information available to people that it has scared the bejesus out of some people. And they feel shook in their worldviews. It challenges a lot of their traditionalism. I think specifically you talk about critical race theory. And I'm the first one to say a lot of the people who advocate for that aren't really any better than the people who just want hagiography and jingoism about the United States. If the only thing that you can see in the United States is bad things, like for instance, when we're arguing that the United States as a country was organized around slavery, it's just not true. It's just not true. But I can argue against that while also recognizing that slavery is absolutely a dark stain that influenced a lot of even what's going on today in modern American society. Like, we can have both of these views, but even sometimes it becomes like this extreme view versus this extreme view, and neither of these views are really valid.
Mike, Evan, my son asked us this weekend, we're driving, and he said, so why is the United States the best country? And we went through it, but we also talked about, some bad things in our history. And he said, like what? And we said, like slavery. And he's like, oh yeah, that was a bad thing. He's 7 years old. He can comprehend that we can be the greatest place on earth, but still have some things that maybe we're not so proud of, and continuing moving forward to strive to a better place.
And even greatest place on earth. Listen, I believe in American exceptionalism, but also, like, I don't want to run down our Canadian friends or our British friends or our friends.
Whoa. How would you stop flip-flopping on Canada? Again, a month ago, you're passing Winnipeg. You can't decide where you land on our great friends to the north.
I love Canada. I think Canada's great.
You just need Winnipeg.
Just Winnipeg in particular. I don't understand the appeal. No,
our listenership is absolutely going down in Winnipeg because of these comments.
The two people who one time downloaded.
We used to be huge in Winnipeg until you started running your mouth for it.
The world is full of nuance, though. I guess the decision that I make, because obviously I have very strong political convictions. I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't. And one thing that is hard, because I get the impulse sometimes when there's been a teacher and my kid comes home and they describe something the teacher said in a particular way, and it kind of tweaked me a little bit, right? And it's just like, I don't feel like they're getting that. It's hard to control the impulse to want to do something about that. And what I have convinced myself is I'm not afraid of my kids experiencing the world. I want to be uncompromising on certain core values, which are, you have to work hard, and you have to be honest, and you have to be kind, and you should expect to get what you earn and nothing more. If you get more than that, then I guess that's gravy. But, and you need to be accountable. When you make mistakes, you have to own them. But beyond that, like ideology and everything else, like I hope they explore the world, and I hope they arrive at their own conclusions. And yes, their dad's going to be an influence on them. How could I not be? But, if they end up with a different worldview than mine, we're going to have some interesting conversations at Thanksgiving, but I'm not afraid of that. And I think people need to stop being afraid of it. The world's not going to end if your kid becomes a Democrat or a Republican, as the case may be.
Right. And I think it's interesting when I talk to our son about these kind of things, because obviously, like you, our household, we talk about politics, and in Evan's mind, he likes to say, he likes to create sort of a good guys, bad guys sort of scenario, right? I mean, that's
what you expect from somebody his age. It's
he's 7 years old, about to be 8. And we try really hard to make sure that it's clear, because we disagree with somebody doesn't mean they're a bad person. And that's at times it's hard in this environment, particularly on the national stage. It's much easier on the local stage, right? For us to talk about Republicans, because Evan has heard us talk about many Republicans in a friendly way. On the national stage, it's a little more difficult, but I think we, try to do our best to not be us versus them, because we're all supposed to be on the same side at the end of the day.
But there's a corollary to that, which is that there are bad people in the world.
Right, but on both sides of the aisle.
Right, sure. It has nothing to do with their ideology. Like, Alex Jones is a bad person.
Yeah, Bob Menendez is a bad person.
Right. Yeah, Alex Jones sells falsehoods for money. He misleads people. I don't think he'd really believe what he's saying.
Let's try people to hurt the parents of their children.
Right. And the thing, all he's really doing it for is to sell supplements.
Right.
That's it. He just wants to sell you some vitamins, which probably don't do any of the things he claims they're doing. So get your medical advice from people who aren't Alex Jones, who maybe hold an actual medical degree. But I mean, that's, I guess, to segue a little bit into something I wrote this week, I wrote about J.D. Vance and his views about women and careers, which have been an ongoing theme since he was elevated to the national ballot. And some of the things he views, I just view as odious. Like, this is not a valid viewpoint. And I'm not saying that it's invalid that some people some women choose to be at home and to be, I guess, what you would traditionally think of as like a homemaker, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a man choosing to do that. There's also nothing wrong with a woman who says, you know what, children are just not going to be a part of my life and I'm going to focus on my career. That's a valid path too. There's many paths, and I've always considered the promise of America when we talk about, you're guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah, you're guaranteed to be allowed to live, and you're guaranteed to be allowed to live freely, and you're guaranteed to be able to use that life and that freedom to pursue happiness in the way that makes sense to you. And
yeah, so I get
this idea that J.D. Vance is going to, a government official, a sitting U.S. senator who aspires to be vice president of the United States, a heartbeat away from the presidency, would have this in mind, that there's just this one way to live and be happy, I find un-American. And I don't think that's a valid. And what was interesting is when I wrote the column, down in the comments, some of the people were saying, well, you're name calling and you're being hypocritical because you're telling J.D. Vance he can't hold this view. And I mean, I think that's where we get into like the both side. I don't know what you want to call it, the both sidism, or like, that's about, some arguments are invalid. How J.D. Vance feels about women who have careers and who maybe choose to not have children or have children, whatever, those views are invalid.
Well, and I think about, I, like you, if somebody, male or female, chooses to stay at home, has the ability to do that financially and whatever, yeah, exactly. It's none of my business, right? Mind your own damn business. But one thing that I don't think we talk enough about, what if every woman in this country decided to stay at home? What would that mean in terms of like what folks bring to the workplace? There are a lot of people in both of our lives that provide really, really great things to society by working outside of the home. It makes their lives better, but also, I mean, think about women's role in so many historical events and so many different things. And if J.D. Vance got his way, they would just be at home taking care of those babies.
There has been, I mean, not to be the glinty-eyed capitalist about this, because all the stuff you're saying about, the viewpoints that women provide in the workplace or their jobs, or the women who are teachers or nurses or doctors or lawyers or corporate executives or whatever, that's all valid. But to be the glinty-eyed capitalist here, there have been economic studies about the benefits of educating women and moving women into the workforce, and what that creates in terms of prosperity. And I understand it's not all about the GDP, right? The gross domestic product, but that is pretty important. We are a far more prosperous country in the United States of America because we educate our women and we give them, and understanding, the problems we've had with sexism and what we've overcome and what we've yet to overcome. We're not perfect. I'm not saying we are, but we are a more prosperous society because generally women in the United States can pursue education and can pursue careers, and that makes all of us better.
Next thing we need to do is just pay them at the same rate that men get paid, and then we'll be in good shape.
We can have a debate about that.
But to bring it back...
When I say we can have a debate about that, I'm not against paying people, but I think sometimes the metrics we use to measure that...
Let's bring it home to North Dakota. I mean, we've got a workforce shortage. How much have we talked about the need for childcare in this state? And one of the biggest impetuses for getting childcare is so both parents can be in the workforce, right? And again, if J.D. Vance and his worldview had their way, we wouldn't have to worry about childcare because mom would be at home taking care of those babies. And certainly if mom wasn't there, grandma would be there because that's the only reason women or elderly women are around is to take care of their grandchildren. I mean, it's just so stupid and outdated. And again, as part of living in a free society, Rob, if you choose to stay and work at home, it's none of my damn business. If you choose to do that, not the right choice for me. It's not the right choice for my family. But guess what? It's none of his business.
I got an email because in that column, I kind of started writing about my own experience and being a dad and the fact that I'm a work from home dad. And so a lot of times it's easier for me to do a lot of things during the day while my wife is at work because she's kind of she's a teacher. So, it's not exactly punch the clock, but she has hours where she's expected.
Well, it's not a bunch of flexibility to run home in the middle of the day to put in a load of laundry or something.
So I'm at home. So guess who's, I doing the dishes and doing some sweeping and I get the groceries and I get dinner going so that, by the time she gets home, I got dinner on the table, right? And I had somebody email me and make fun of me like I was some effeminate man. And I'm like, I don't understand. I take my definition of masculinity from my father, who I'm looking right now at his Silver Star. He won. He's a combat veteran and was a cop who arrested serial killers. So he's one of the most manliest men I know who had no problem doing the dishes and cooking, right? He had no problem doing that stuff. Like there was no women's work and men's work.
So it's really funny.
There's just work. Like he's a parent. He's a part of the household. You do what you got to do.
I grew up in a household the exact same way. There was never women's work and man's work. And sometimes, you sort of fall into things that you're better at or whatever. But it is interesting.
When it comes to wrestling the snowblower through the snow, yeah, I do that because I'm a lot bigger and stronger than my wife. It's just reality. It's easier for me to do it.
I wish Erin would do that. I wish she would take that over because I hate snowblowing because the sucker never starts. It never starts.
You got to get the plug-in electric start.
So I've got the I've got the plug-in electric start, and
start.
Yeah, I've got some I don't take care of it the way I should. That's on me. But anyway, and we're teaching our kid the same thing. There's no man jobs or woman jobs. Everybody's got Erin's right now listening to this and saying, I wish you'd do a little bit more laundry. I wish you'd cook a few more meals.
I wish you'd pick your underwear up.
Yeah, exactly right. But we're trying the best we can.
Yeah. So it just kind of amazes me. And it's just, I don't, and listen, I'm not saying that your choices are invalid for you. What I'm saying is that they become invalid when you try to impose them on other people. Would you say that there's just this one path that we have to walk? I'm sorry, that's un-American. And even, I realize that's kind of a complicated example, but I think it speaks to some of these other things. Like if you're having a debate about gun control and then somebody comes along and says the Sandy Hook school shooting didn't happen. Well, no, that's not part of the debate. That's not a valid part of it. It did happen. It's something it's a part of the reality that we have to incorporate into this debate. So,
and we need to continue to try to stop kids from being shot. And if you can't accept that kids are getting shot, why would they try to have any, and maybe there's not a solution, but as a society, I think it's a good goal for us to make sure that kids don't get shot in school.
Yeah, well, so do I. And I say that as somebody, I own a lot of guns and I'm a Second Amendment supporter, but it's a real problem. And both you and I can acknowledge that it's a problem, and it's a problem we would both like to solve, and we just have very different ideas of what's possible or what would work.
Right. And mine are right. Yours are no. That's what we're not supposed to be doing on this podcast.
You're allowed to believe that you're right and I'm wrong.
No, of course.
I believe my
Yeah, and it'd be silly if I didn't think I was
Right.
right.
I hope you're not advocating for things you think are incorrect.
Well, I was told to come on this podcast and say certain things by the cabal.
By the cabal. We got to figure out who that cabal is. That brought up something else interesting that they said, which was, Ben was talking about core principles, right? Respect, authenticity, and curiosity is what I wrote down. And the authenticity thing, I think, is a big one. Like, that's kind of the sleeper out of those three, right? Like, being curious about why other people believe what they believe, that makes a lot of sense. Respect. The authenticity thing, because there's a lot of people, I think, that don't really believe. I think Donald Trump doesn't believe a lot of this stuff. I don't think Donald Trump, when he's talking about how, like angel wings formed over his assassination attempt, I don't think he really believes. I think he's pandering to an audience. I think some of these cable news hosts, when they're inveighing against the other Republicans or Democrats, whoever it is, they make up things. I think they're playing a part. He called it WWE, professional wrestling, kind of kayfabe. There is a lot of that going on where it's just not authentic.
And how many people do you and I talk to who say, "Oh, I wish Trump wasn't our nominee," or I can't stand that guy in private, but then in public they're talking about, he's the greatest president, we have to elect that guy, whatever. That's so inauthentic.
Or a lot of Democrats not so long ago were like, oh my God, Joe Biden's so old, I don't think he could do it. But publicly, it's like, he's fine. You're an ageist, horrible person for even bringing it up.
I feel attacked right now by the way around.
He wasn't fine. Yeah, I mean, I remember you getting after me a little bit. Although in your defense, I'm not talking about people like you so much as people like in his inner circle who had every reason to know.
Yeah, because after the debate, I mean, I knew he had to either go or he was going to lose. I mean, there was no two ways about it. So anyway, yeah.
I do think a lot of what we're talking about is hard, but I think if there is a central point, like kind of the inflection point that controls everything else, we have got to stop pretending like every election is the last election. We've got to stop pretending like I think that's how so many people are justifying. So many Republicans I know who I talk to and they agree with everything I'm saying about Trump. But because they're convinced that Kamala Harris being elected is worse. I mean, I had a conversation the other day with a very prominent Republican who everybody listening to this would recognize when I say their name. And
go ahead and say their name then, Rob.
Because it was a private conversation. But we were talking about Donald Trump. But I said all Kamala Harris is going to be, obviously from the perspective of two Republican conservatives talking to one another, all she's going to be is a bad president. That's it. We've had bad presidents before. And he's like, at the end of it, he told me, he's like, you really made me feel better about Trump losing. I feel like I may have pulled this person away from voting for Donald Trump. I don't know. So
I saw Pat Toomey on CNBC the other day talking about how he's not voting for either one. And the hosts were saying, yeah, but now we're going to have, 80% corporate tax rates or whatever. And Pat Toomey said, no, because we're going to elect a Republican Senate. And if folks just focus on electing a Republican Senate to be the check, and you have, Kamala's not going to be able to do all these nightmarish things that Republicans seem to think she's going to do. Not to mention, most of the time when a president gets in there, they can't move very big things once they're dead, especially when it's this divided. The House is going to be close. The Senate's going to be close. There's going to have to be compromise. She's not going to be able to just run some crazy left wing.
Even if she is, that stuff could be unwound. I mean, even stipulating to the idea that she could do that. Look at some of the tax rates we had under like the Roosevelt administration.
Right.
I mean, we've been there before. We realized it was a bad idea and we pulled back. Like, okay, so maybe you elect Kamala Harris and maybe she makes some mistakes. But again, it's not the end of the world. We'll have another election 4 years hence. And my problem with Donald Trump, so much of it is tied up in the fact that I don't think that guy wants any more elections. And maybe you can accuse me of hyperbole or whatever, but this is a guy who has been taking an axe to the trunk of our institutions. And I just don't want that to happen anymore.
Well, Rob, you just got done saying people need to stop acting like this is going to be the last election. And then you just said this might be the last election.
Okay. Fair enough. In my defense, though, the guy on the ballot tried to overturn the last election.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. There's some history on your side on this thing, but maybe we shouldn't just say, just ignore that this might be the last election. By the way, I don't think it's going to be the last election, even though I think this guy would like it to be. I think that our country's bigger than that, and we would.
I think there's enough. I think there's enough people who will hold on to the order. They don't want it to go. And again, so much of how we perceive this stuff is dictated by the small percentage of the noisiest people. Whether it's what did he say, like the 9% or whatever that's generating most of the content on Twitter, or even just the fact most Americans don't have.
Yeah,
but I think the amount of time that the journalists who inform Americans spend talking about what they see on Twitter is obnoxious.
Yeah, I think it was 6% generate like 75% of the political tweets or something like that.
Stop hearing
it is so crazy. So I need to up my game to get to be part of that 6%. I mean, I think I'm just going to start tweeting I'm going to start Xing all the time.
I don't know if it's become clear. I've almost entirely stopped caring about social media. And I say that like the only things I really post are just links to my articles, and that's it. I'm not there I don't feel like I have to weigh in on every little thing that happens. Like if I want to weigh in on something, I write a column about it, post about social media, and that's it.
Yeah, but I think you spending days and nights going back and forth with people who don't actually read your stuff would be a good use of your time. Yeah.
I used to do that. I did that once upon a time. I don't anymore. I occasionally I'll chime in a little bit, but you know, if I have like an extra 5 minutes, and then I'm moving on with my life. And when I see the notifications, a lot of times I'll just mute that conversation. I'm done with it because I'm not going to win. It doesn't really matter, you know. And that's something else.
And I think what you need is
that Facebook troll that's really annoying you.
Yeah,
they're not really changing anyone's mind. You don't really.
Right. Well, what you need, Rob, is to have friends like mine that when it was said that I was gay, fat, and a communist, they responded with, "He's not gay."
All right. Well,
that's where you need a friend.
All right. I'm apparently an effeminate, pot-smoking libertarian. None of which are really true, except for maybe the libertarian part.
Yeah. Well, stop cooking for your family.
Yeah. What a terrible person I am. Anyway, we had tacos last night. They were really good. Okay. Well, we're going to end the show.
Tacos. Hey, I'm not going to just let you just drop tacos and not let me comment on that. I have a sign in my office that says, "You can't make everybody happy. You're not a taco." And that literally is how I live my life.
I want to say, because everyone's kind of like the hamburger is like the kind of the American, but I think it's tacos at this point.
Yeah.
Like I haven't looked at statistics, so I may get fact checked, but I have a feeling that Americans consume more tacos at this point than hamburgers.
Well, it's because they're delicious.
They are delicious. You can't go wrong. All right, we're gonna put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. Certainly appreciate it. Coming up on Friday, we're gonna have the gubernatorial debate between Republican candidate Kelly Armstrong, who's currently our congressman, and the challenger Meryl Pepcorn, who's a Democrat and currently a state senator from the Fargo area. Kelly, of course, from Dickinson, if that matters. That's going to be on the show on Friday, and then the Friday after that, we're going to have a debate about Measure 4. So that'll be a lot of fun as well. Measure 4, of course, being the property tax measure. The other day, I referred to it as Measure 4, and somebody was like, "What are you talking about?"
Well, I mean, it's only been Measure 4 for a few weeks, so
that's yeah. And in my head, I keep wanting to call it Measure 2 because that's what it was in 2012, but it's not 12 years ago.
Oh, Rob's been doing this too long. I get a kick out of when people say, "Hey, remember we defeated Measure 5?" Well, you're going to have to be more specific.
Which Measure 5 are you talking about? Because there's been a few of them.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.